In the fall of 2008, America faced the greatest financial collapse since the Great Depression. News anchors told the public that Congress had approved a $700 billion bailout to save the banking system. But that was only the surface of the story, a smokescreen for something far larger. Behind closed doors, the US Federal Reserve quietly funneled not billions, but trillions of dollars to Wall Street and foreign banks. For 3 years, the truth was buried under layers of secrecy, until one lawsuit forced it into the light. What followed was a revelation of deception, power, and the largest financial rescue ever hidden from the public. September 15, 2008. Lehman Brothers collapses, triggering chaos across global markets. Stocks crash, credit freezes, panic spreads. The US government scrambles to respond, announcing the Troubled Asset Relief Program, TARP. Officials tell Americans that $700 billion will stabilize the system and restore confidence. On television, leaders speak of sacrifice and responsibility. But while the public debates TARP, the real bailout is already underway, hidden in the vaults of the Federal Reserve, where trillions of dollars are being created out of thin air. This secret lending program was not approved by Congress, nor disclosed to the public. The Fed lent money to anyone deemed too big to fail: Wall Street giants, foreign institutions, hedge funds, even corporations. Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Citigroup, Bank of America, each received hundreds of billions in lifelines. Meanwhile, Deutsche Bank in Germany, Barclays in the UK, and UBS in Switzerland quietly drew from the same American pool of cash. The Federal Reserve had turned itself into the world's emergency lender, and no one outside the system knew. How did they hide it? Through a maze of bureaucratic programs with harmless names. The term auction facility, the primary dealer credit facility, the asset-backed commercial paper program. Each sounded technical, dull, and harmless by design. But collectively, these programs funneled $16 trillion into the financial system. It was the largest transfer of wealth in human history, disguised behind the illusion of stability. And all of it happened without public debate, without congressional oversight, and without a single televised announcement. For 3 years, the lie held. The Federal Reserve refused to disclose the details, claiming that transparency would cause market panic. It took a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit by Bloomberg News to break the silence. After 2 years of legal battles, the courts forced the Fed to release the data in 2011. What emerged stunned even the most cynical observers. $16.1 trillion in loans between 2007 and 2010, 23 times larger than the official bailout number. The true scale of the rescue had been hidden in plain sight. The data revealed more than just numbers. Citigroup alone borrowed $2.5 trillion. Morgan Stanley, over $2 trillion. Bank of America, $1.3 trillion. Even foreign banks received enormous sums. Deutsche Bank, $354 billion. Barclays, $868 billion. The Royal Bank of Scotland, $541 billion. All of it backed by the US taxpayer, though the taxpayers never consented. These were not gifts, officials insisted. They were secured loans. But the collateral, toxic mortgage-backed securities, the same assets that had triggered the crash. The Fed took garbage and called it gold. While Wall Street was being saved in secret, Main Street was burning in public. Between 2008 and 2010, nearly 4 million American families lost their homes. The Home Affordable Modification Program, meant to help struggling homeowners, was a bureaucratic failure. Out of 4 million eligible applicants, only a fraction received relief. While bankers borrowed at 0.5% interest, ordinary citizens faced foreclosure rates of 6 and 7%. The same institutions that caused the crisis were rewarded, while the people who suffered paid the price. No one went to jail. Not a single major executive was prosecuted for the frauds that fueled the crisis. The Department of Justice claimed that prosecuting the big banks might destabilize the financial system. Instead, the banks paid fines, tiny compared to their profits, and called it accountability. Goldman Sachs paid $5 billion. To the public, that sounded like justice. But for a firm earning hundreds of billions in revenue, it was little more than the cost of doing business. In 2008 alone, Wall Street paid out $18.4 billion in bonuses. Morgan Stanley borrowed $107 billion from the Fed and paid $6.4 billion in compensation that same quarter. Goldman Sachs borrowed $69 billion and paid nearly $11 billion in bonuses. Citigroup, which borrowed $2.5 trillion in total, paid over $5 billion in rewards. The very money meant to stabilize the system went directly into the pockets of those who broke it. The bailout was not a rescue, it was a reward. To understand how this was possible, you must understand what the Federal Reserve is. It is not a government agency. It is a quasi-private institution, owned by its member banks, yet endowed with powers that rival those of Congress. It can create money, digitally, instantly, and lend it under emergency authority. In 2008, the Fed invoked Section 13(3) of the Federal Reserve Act, declaring unusual and exigent circumstances. That declaration allowed it to lend unlimited sums to whomever it deemed necessary, in total secrecy. Even members of Congress were kept in the dark. The public believed that TARP was the bailout, the only bailout. But TARP was the decoy, a public spectacle meant to distract from the invisible flood of money flowing behind the scenes. For the next 3 years, the Fed would quietly prop up the financial system, ensuring that the very institutions that had gambled and lost would not fail. The system was not reformed. It was rescued, repackaged, and reinforced. When the data finally became public, the narrative was already set. The media declared that the bailouts worked. Banks were profitable again. Markets had recovered. But what the numbers showed was not a recovery. It was a reallocation of wealth. The top 5 banks in the United States emerged from the crisis larger than before. In 2008, they controlled 40% of all banking assets. By 2025, that figure had climbed to nearly 50%. Too big to fail had become too big to question. The moral hazard was complete. Wall Street learned that failure had no consequences. The government had shown that losses would be socialized while profits remained private. Heads they win, tails you lose. This new precedent reshaped the global financial order. Risk-taking was no longer a danger. It was a business model, subsidized by the American taxpayer. And the next time the system trembled, the bankers would know exactly what to expect. In 2010, Congress passed the Dodd-Frank Act, promising reform. But buried deep within its thousands of pages was a new power: bail-ins. Next time, they wouldn't take taxpayer money to save the banks. They'd take your money. Depositor funds could legally be converted into bank equity to recapitalize failed institutions. It happened in Cyprus in 2013. It can happen anywhere. In the next crisis, the rescue will come not from above, but from within. From your savings account. The $16 trillion secret of 2008 was not just a story of numbers. It was a warning. A system that rewards failure, conceals truth, and punishes the innocent cannot endure forever. The financial crisis didn't end. It evolved. The same institutions are larger. The same mechanisms remain in place. And the same quiet corridors of power prepare for the next collapse. When that day comes, remember, the last time they said it was $700 billion, it was really $16 trillion.